What's up, guys? Welcome to the very first episode of the Ink Disciple podcast. My name is Sean Andrews, and I'm a man of God and virtuous leader of men who seeks discomfort. I'm a chain breaker, humble servant, and dauntless disciple of Jesus Christ. But that isn't who I was a year ago. I had no relationship with God. I didn't go to church, and if I did, it was only on Christmas or Easter. I was what some people would affectionately call a C&E Christian. I was addicted to comfort. I was depressed, struggled with anxiety, had fear of man, imposter syndrome, and had a God-sized hole in my heart that I didn't know was there. I would try to fill that hole or cope with these things using food, alcohol, material possessions, among many other things. But before I hop into all that, I want to take a minute to thank someone. Sean Kirsten. If it wasn't for him donating money to me to start this podcast and encouraging me, I would have never done it. You see, starting a podcast was never on my bingo card for 2025. I've never wanted a podcast, nor did I have any interest in doing one. But Sean said I needed to do it, so here we are. And the purpose of this podcast is to tell people's testimonies about how they found their relationship with God, how God's moving in their lives, and just their stories. I want to amplify God's stories and let people know the good news of God, and we'll talk about the good news of the gospel. Some episodes may just be me dropping some encouragement or discussing biblical leadership principles. There's no real framework or set agenda. It's just to tell the good news of the Lord. But all right, let's get back to it. So my testimony starts before I was ever even born, in the form of generational curses. My mother's father was an extremely abusive alcoholic. When my mom and her brother were growing up, my grandpa was verbally and physically abusive to everyone in the house. He would stalk my mom and grandma, make sure they were where they said they were going to be. He did a lot of things that no father should ever do to his children, and no husband should ever do to their spouse. This obviously did a lot of psychological damage to my mom. In her senior year of high school, she turned 18 and got married to my dad to escape the terror of that home. But I never knew that crazy alcoholic. My grandfather eventually quit drinking, and he was an amazing grandfather to me, but the damage had already been done. The generational curses and generational trauma had already been passed down. By the age of 21, my mom was a stay-at-home mom and homemaker with 2 kids, my sister and I. My dad worked as much as humanly possible to provide for us, and I love my mom and dad, and I wouldn't ever say anything bad about them. I believe they raised my sister and I the best they knew how, especially with how traumatic my mom's childhood was. We obviously didn't have nearly as bad of a childhood as my mom did, but there were a lot of things that happened in my childhood that stuck with me throughout my life. See, my mom didn't really know how to show affection because she wasn't shown affection. She only knew abuse and disorder. So that was one of the things that really formed my childhood. So as far as religion goes, my sister and I were raised Catholic. The only thing I understood was that there's a bunch of rules and you had to say prayers. But I never understood we were supposed to have a relationship with God. I went through a time in life where I even doubted if God was real. At 16, I quit going to church because I got a part-time job that required me to work the weekends. This is when I started getting cigarettes and alcohol from the people I worked with and from some people that I associated with. And this was really the beginning of the decline into the pit depravity that I lived in for so many years. I almost didn't graduate high school. I had undiagnosed ADD, and this caused me to be very bored in school. I wanted to sleep. I slept in almost every class of every day. Luckily, I did graduate, but when I was 18, I bought my childhood home from my parents, and I had 3 friends move in. We thought it was going to be a great time, and it was. It was too much fun. We constantly partied and had the police called on us numerous times. And at 19, they all got girlfriends and moved out and got places of their own. So this meant I couldn't afford that home anymore. I was $111,000 in debt, making $10.50 an hour at a factory. So I ended up having to file Chapter 7 bankruptcy and letting the house go back to the bank. Luckily, my parents let me move back in with them, but I still felt like a failure. I started doing and selling drugs, mostly pills. And on one occasion, I took multiple Xanax while working third shift at the factory. I had to drive home under the influence, and it was so bad I could barely keep my eyes open. I was sticking my head out the window just to stay awake. That morning, I was supposed to take my mom to meet a coworker because my mom's car was in the shop getting worked on. But I was so high when I got home, I fell asleep in the lazy boy, and she was unable to wake me up. My dad ended up having to take my mom to meet her coworker, and I ended up waking up around lunchtime, still in the lazy boy. And I lied to my dad. I told him I had taken some cough syrup when I got home because I didn't feel good, and it must have knocked me out. But that was one of the worst feelings I'd ever had, letting down my family because I was on drugs. And I knew that I had to stop then. So luckily, I was able to stop on my own accord, and I never touched pills after that. And then at 21, I moved in with a buddy, and we started partying, going out to bars, casinos, strip clubs, whatever was available, we did it. I was drinking and driving nonstop. I would joke that I was a professional drunk driver, like it was no big deal. I would even keep a bottle of whiskey in the backseat of the car. I'd stop at the gas station, get a fountain pop. I'd fill it up halfway, and then I'd go get back in the car, and I'd take the whiskey bottle, fill it up the rest of the way, and I would start driving around drinking from the cup, and like it was no big deal, joke about it. And it was just the normal. Still to this day, I don't know how I never wrecked, hurt someone, hurt myself. And I thank God for that every day. At 23, I got a job as a corrections officer at a jail in Indianapolis. And after seeing what the inside of a jail was like, I realized I wasn't cut out to be an inmate. I stopped drinking and driving, but I was still drinking heavily. A few months later, I went to a bar with some people I knew, and while we were there, a fight happened and someone died. Even though I wasn't involved, it really messed me up for many years after that. I don't know if it was survivor's guilt or what it was, but it was just always laid heavy on my heart. A few months after that, I met my wife, Kelly, and 5 years after that, our daughter, Abigail, was born. But I was still drinking, still living in gluttony. So around that same time, I went to the doctor, and they gave me a physical and a blood draw. They said I had non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. They made me go on a low-fat diet and work out for 30 days, and I continued to drink. But my liver numbers went down. They're like, oh, just start eating better and lose weight, and you'll be good. I didn't do any of that. And then at 31, the twins were born. But this didn't slow down my drinking either. If anything, it made it worse. I was stressed out from having 3 kids. And I didn't know how to cope. And then about 2 years ago, my daughter, Abby, started asking me, Dad, why do you have so many different types of bourbon bottles? Or Daddy's juice, as I called it. And then she would ask me, Dad, how come you had this bottle yesterday, but today you got this bottle? And she was just really starting to pay attention to how much I was drinking and how much Daddy's juice I was going through. And at that time, I started hiding the liquor bottles underneath the kitchen sink from my 7-year-old daughter. And that was a new low for me, a low point in life. So from there, it's just really hard thinking about that as I look back on life. But about a year ago, I was at my lowest. I was always angry and miserable to be around. I hated life and I hated myself. My family would walk on eggshells around me because I was so reactive and grumpy. I had extreme crowd anxiety. If I went to a busy restaurant or store, I would get tension headaches in the back of my neck. I told everyone I was introverted, and I tried my best to not talk to strangers or even people I knew. I was 335 pounds, the heaviest I'd ever been in my whole life, 80 pounds heavier than I am today. I was pre-diabetic, Had high blood pressure, high cholesterol. My liver numbers were the highest they'd ever been. My knees hurt to go up and down stairs. I could barely get off the ground if I got down there. I was just in awful shape, both mentally and physically. And I say all this to tell you, this is who I was before I met Jesus Christ. And on the next episode, I'll tell you how I realized I needed Jesus and what the next steps were after that. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast.